being creative is most highly valued as almost like a status symbol. I joined Puma when it was coming out of bankruptcy in the late 90s. And that was really an incredible time because that was this moment where fashion and sport first came together. We weren't going to be able to compete with the Nikes of the world, the Nike of the world at its own game. About 10 years ago, I launched a brand, PLAE, as I mentioned, PLAE. I think just be true to yourself and have a unique perspective and a reason for being.
And welcome back. My name is Daniel, CEO and founder of Reekolect, here with the Digital Legacy Podcast. And we're here at the Rice Estate in Turnerhill. And I have a very special guest with us here today, Ryan. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us here today. If you can give the audience a little bit about your background, who you are, and what you've done.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
And this is a beautiful estate we're in. My background, gosh, I've been in the footwear industry in some form or fashion from the moment I graduated from school. I was recruited to New Balance here, and we're outside Boston. And so it's a bit of a homecoming to come back here. And I cut my teeth there and was there several years, and then joined Puma when it was coming out of bankruptcy in the late 90s. And that was really an incredible time because that was this moment where fashion and sport first came together. And so we were really kind of the tip of the spear at Puma in terms of launching that collaboration between those two worlds. And it's funny because at Nike at the time, fashion was the F word. Was the notion, and so we were looking for a way in relaunching Puma to compete and to stand out, as we say, to be the Blue Mountain. So you're not the biggest and the best, but you get attention from being a different color, perhaps. And so fashion and sport coming together and embracing that, because that's what people were looking for. And so it's really just leaning into that and providing what people wanted. And that's what really was a springboard for not just Puma, but also then for my entire career from then after. And ended up working with Diesel, UGG, Under Armour, a bunch of brands before ultimately launching PLAE myself about 10 years ago.
Wow, very powerful. Let me touch a little bit on, that time that you had with Puma. During that time, what type of role did you have specifically with Puma? What were you in charge with?
Ended up launching and leading the lifestyle division.
Okay.
As we called it. It was a new concept. So I was just seeing Antonio Bertone the other day. He was our CMO, and we had just this amazing team of design talent around us, and everyone was kind of a bit of a startup vibe and feel before startup was kind of a thing.
Right.
And so just a great team of designers and collaborators and developers. And then we ended up ultimately, as fashion became more prevalent and part of it, we ended up opening a design studio in Soho and moving down there to be closer to the fashion world, as it were.
Now, let me ask you that question. So when you're there at Puma and you're taking a look into the culture, right? What type of platforms would you observe during that time? Like, in other words, were you looking into, we didn't have social media, especially in the 90s. So how were you guiding yourself as to what was trending, what was popular, what was great in that particular time and era?
I think a lot of it was just being immersed in a culture. We talk about there's a creative class, which I think is interesting because I think it's coming back, perhaps. We've gone away from it, but it's coming back where being creative is most highly valued as almost like a status symbol. And so there's a little bit of kind of game recognizes game, if you will, for lack of a better description. But, you recognize when somebody else is also creative and coming from the same space. And at New York, especially at that time, was really an exciting place to be. Jeff Staple was just coming up with Reed Space and everything he was doing. The studio we opened with Puma in Soho was on Spring Street, and Marc Jacobs was just kind of starting out, and he had half a floor in the same building, and John Varvatos had just opened his first store around the corner. And so there was this incredible energy and vibe, and so you just felt it. It was like palpable in the air, and so it was a really one of those kind of magical times,
And what was that competition like? Because during that time, we're talking about early 90s, right?
Late 90s.
Late 90s, okay. So we're talking about what every kid wanted to have was, let's just say, Jordans too, right? Like with the Jordans, you had the Chicago Bulls during the mid-90s that were absolutely had a phenomenal run with Michael Jordan. Everyone wanted to have a pair of Jordans.
Yeah.
How did you compete? How did you guys strategize on, hey, how can we deliver something that's fresh, new, but still going to cause demand within the culture?
I think. Well, that was the whole thing. Is when Puma first was coming out of restructuring, the original plan was to do the traditional sport marketing model, and so we had acquired Vince Carter in his rookie year, which is a huge get.
Yeah.
And he wore Puma shoes for the season, won Rookie of the Year, and then showed up on the cover of ESPN magazine with a pair of Nikes draped around his neck. And it was just this moment where we recognized that as a small company restarting, we weren't going to be able to compete with the Nikes of the world, the Nike of the world at its own game. And so we had to, zig when others were zagging. And so the whole point of you're asking about how do we compete, we competed by just choosing a different game, making up different rules. And that was where the fashion, embracing the part of the world that the others weren't wanting to play or weren't interested in. And that's then carving out a space there. And that's really how we found our way.
Powerful, powerful, powerful. Now, when we're talking about level of creativity, because I agree with you, I feel that now people are really going back to the essence of bringing out that natural, raw sense of creativity into that. And it's not so much about branded, items or shoes or whatnot. Now it's about being exclusive, right? About being different and standing out. How would you get prepared for, let's say, an entrepreneur that's watching right now that's considering in some sort of design and shoes? How would you prepare yourself with your team and to get into that, let's call it, for lack of a better word, get into the zone of that creativity? Like, was there a particular mantra or process that you went through that you can elaborate on?
There's no right or wrong answer to this, but I think one of the greatest inspirations I took was when I was doing Diesel. Renzo Rosso, famously owns Diesel and the parent company, and all the other brands that he's acquired, over the years. I remember asking about how he stays inspired in leading these fashion brands, because he didn't like us actually tapping into any type of trend service or any type of mass direction that you might get. A lot of designers go after and try to find. He really liked everyone to kind of find their own voice and path and have their own point of view and expression. And so in talking to him about how do you find that inspiration, all he really said was he reads as much as he can possibly read and absorbs everything he can possibly absorb, because he really just wants to be plugged into what's happening. And that means music, that means visuals, that means the news, the culture, just as much as you can be plugged in and aware, and then that in a way informs the current, where things are flowing. And so there's a sense of just knowing and trusting your gut and your feel of where you're moving to. And I think today that's much easier in a way, because we're so inundated. And so in some ways it's kind of like, it's like surfing. I don't know if you surf, but
I haven't personally, but
there's a wave that comes and you want to get, be able to get up and ride on the wave and not be washed over. And so I think that's the challenge today, is being able to ride the wave and have a perspective.
I agree. How do you think, if kind of going back now to today, since we touched on that point, how would you have used social media, the capabilities that we have available today, back then? Do you think you would have been more used? Like, how do you think you yourself would have used it?
I don't know that we would use it any different than it's being used today. I think it's the awareness and connection. I think where the biggest advantage with social is being able to connect directly as a creator to the people you're creating for. And to be able to see a dialogue between is, in the past when we talk about those days, there was so many barriers. You create something, and then it would go through a marketing team, and then it would go to a sales team, and then a buying team, and then end up on the store. And so you have this like playing phone, this game of telephone, right, where it's passed down from person to person. And so you never end up with this really pure message that's authentic to the creation of something being able to be conveyed to the person who's receiving it, and vice versa for the person who's receiving it, using it, to be able to communicate back. And so I think that dynamic of the back and forth is really powerful. In the same way we can sit here and have a conversation. I can tell you about what I'm thinking if I'm creating something. You can tell me what you think back. That's, I think, the biggest power of social media.
That's very powerful, the way you analyze it that way. That's great. That's phenomenal. And Ryan, tell me about today. What are you doing today now? What projects are you working in now that you have cooking up?
Today, well, so about 10 years ago, I launched a brand, PLAE, as I mentioned, PLAE, and we started with kids. And the notion was around this idea of kids are the ultimate creators, because they don't know the idea that things are impossible, that everything's possible. And so that notion of play, we're born into this world only knowing how to do a handful of things that are essential to our survival. We know how to breathe, we know how to eat, we know how to sleep, and we know how to play. And that programmatic sense of self-preservation and growth and evolution is how we interact with play is how we interact with one another, how we interact with the world around us, and how we learn and grow. And so we started this brand originally around kid and trying to be inspired by kids, and also to create a product for them that was being ignored, and it was a white space at the time. And so that really grew in an incredible following and growth, and we ended up becoming the largest brand for kids at Nordstrom at the time. And then there was COVID, which had caused, business challenges and everything. COVID was a pivot for us, and we ended up moving direct to consumer. And so when we talk about social, it's really important for us because that's how we interact with our customers today. And so that's really inspired us because there's been a real push from our base to be able to move into adult product. And so we're launching adult. We did a soft launch some time ago, and we're unveiling a new style silhouette here today and tomorrow, in fact. And so we're excited for that. And I'll be curious to hear your thoughts in this kind of conversation that we're having back and forth.
Absolutely. That's incredible. And let me ask you on that, when you're designing for the kids, right? Because you can't necessarily market to children, right? So to your point, you're tapping into now adult markets in there because you initially have to be strategic on how you do market the actual products themselves, right? Or what's the process that you guys use as you develop a campaign for advertising and marketing? It's
interesting because there's multiple customers when you're looking at a kid's product, right? Because there's the wallet, which is usually typically mom or dad,
right?
And then there's the actual the user who's the kid, and so you have to really appeal to both.
Exactly.
And so it's a unique challenge. We don't try to market, if you will, to one particular aspect or the other. It's really this idea that there's a universal language and conversation. And it's the idea that we're not talking down to kids and trying to, literally patronize them in any type of way, but to speak to everyone on the same level. And it's also a little bit of, I don't know if you had this when you were a kid, but family get-togethers, and there's a little kid table in the corner.
Of course.
And you think longingly, I remember this, as a kid, you're like, I can't wait till I graduate to the adult table.
Yeah, that's true.
And then one day you finally do, and then you realize, well, hey, there's all these rules. You can't talk out of turn, can't put your elbows on the table, set up straight, like all these things. And you're like, so much more fun at the kid table. But you don't want to go back to the kid table because you don't want to be looked down upon.
Exactly.
And so it's really elevating that and having everyone be on the same playing field.
Are there anything else that you're working on right now? Like, what's the vision? What's the next step for the company or the brand 5-10 years from now? And how does AI in any way, shape, or form play into that?
Whatever answer I give you for AI today is going to be outdated by the time whatever this is, by the time we're getting.
Very true.
AI is just an incredible tool. And so I think we're all trying to figure out how best to use it as we look forward. And in terms of the future of the brand, again, back to it, as you brought up earlier, I think it's a conversation. I think play is an engagement, both, as a concept for the brand and for how we go about creating and what we're creating and when we're creating it back and forth. And so we're just look to be innovative and unique and have a reason for being in everything we do.
Phenomenal. In closing here, Ryan, what piece of advice would you give to an inspiring entrepreneur that wants to follow a similar career path that you've taken?
There's no similar career path.
Well, in other words, in style and fashion, because again, due to that, there's so many people that always want to come out with, apparel or some sort of apparel for children. It's a very common request that I know because I also, one of my first initial businesses were branding and marketing. And again, this request always comes in. Someone comes up with a phenomenal idea or design or a style, something that they want to channel and reflect and communicate in the sense of apparel and style and design. But then they get into the whole logistics of it, and then the whole marketing and the business aspect of it comes, and manufacturing and so on. But for someone that's motivated and feels passionate and has this vision of creating something in fashion, what advice would you give to them?
I think just be true to yourself and have a unique perspective and a reason for being. Look, there's a lot of luck involved in terms of catching the right, getting in the right wave to come at the right time and being in the right place. So a lot of it's that. But I think so all you can do is just be honest and authentic with what you're creating, and obviously you have to be passionate for it. And there's a little bit of hope and luck involved, and off you go.
Absolutely. Well, Ryan, listen, thank you so much for taking the time again to come here on the podcast, and we can hear your side of the story and your advice. Is there anything we can tell the public where they want to know more about PLAE and the work?
Yeah. Come to PLAE.co, PLAE.co, and love to both see the product out in the streets, but on people's feet. So it looks better that way.
Absolutely.
and hear any feedback, because it's not a fixed thing. Like I say, it's a conversation. So we're always looking to make everything better. So welcome all feedback.
Absolutely. We'll put that in the description. Well, Ryan, again, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And until then, thank you for joining us.